Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Melissa and I'm the owner of seasonandserveblog.com. Fall is just around the corner and I'm making 3 of my favorite fall meal prep recipes. These recipes are guaranteed to be comforting, warm, and delicious. So today we are going to be making a traditional shepherd's pie, homemade garden tomato soup, and butternut squash pasta with sage. We're going to start off by making the comfort food of all comfort foods, traditional shepherd's pie. I go the traditional route and use ground lamb, but if you don't like ground lamb, you can of course substitute it with ground beef. So let me show you how to make it. We're going to begin by peeling our potatoes, and for this recipe you need at least 2 large potatoes or about 5 to 6 medium potatoes. And these potatoes are actually from our garden this year, so it was super cool to use them in a recipe. So I'm going ahead and just peeling up all the potatoes, and then I'm just slicing them into 1-inch cubes. And you want to make sure you cut the potatoes into a uniform size so that they all cook at the same time. Once your potatoes are all cut up, just add them to a pot full of water along with some salt, and then bring them to a boil on the stove and cook them for about 20 minutes or until they're fork tender. Next we'll prepare our carrots, and carrots are a really traditional ingredient to use in a shepherd's pie. So I'm just peeling my carrot and then slicing it up into little tiny cubes. I'm not going to cook these, so I want to make sure that the cubes are really small so that they cook through when I bake it in the oven. Once the carrots are chopped up, just add them to a bowl and set them aside for now. Prepare the ingredients for the meat filling, and we'll start off by chopping up an onion. You want to make sure you chop the onion into really small pieces so that the onion kind of disintegrates and blends in with the meat as it cooks. And next we'll chop up some garlic, and again make sure you chop it really finely so that it blends in really well with the meat. And for that true homey and comforting flavor, we are going to add some thyme leaves. So I'm just removing them from the stem and then giving them a little bit of a chop. Next we'll move on to cooking our meat. So add a little splash of olive oil to the pan, followed by the ground lamb. And again, you can substitute this with ground beef as well. Once the meat is browned, go ahead and add the onion, followed by the garlic and thyme. Give everything a mix through and then add some tomato paste. You want about 1 tablespoon. And then a dash of Worcestershire sauce. And don't forget, all the full measurements and directions can be found on my blog, and I'll leave the links to all the recipes I'm making today in the description box below. And next we're going to add some beef broth, and this will help all the flavors come together. So I'm going to go ahead and simmer this down until there's barely any liquid left, and then remove it from the pan and let it cool. Next we'll move on to the potato topping, and to make sure we have the smoothest and creamiest potatoes, I'm going to use a potato ricer. And all you do is add your cooked potatoes into the ricer, and then simply press down and all your potatoes will come out super smooth. And I recently bought this potato ricer and I cannot say enough good things about it. I will basically never go back to using a potato masher. And once your potatoes are all done, go ahead and add some butter. And I admit this is a lot of butter, but it is so delicious. And if that wasn't enough, we're also going to add some Gouda cheese. And even if that wasn't enough, we're also going to add some half and half. And of course you can substitute just regular milk for half and half, but this makes it super creamy and delicious. And then just mix everything to combine. Once all your ingredients are mixed through, just go ahead and set the potatoes aside for now while we prepare our ramekins. Next we'll move on to building our shepherd's pie, and you can either do this in little ramekins like I'm using here or in an 8x8 baking dish. So I'm starting off by layering the lamb on the bottom, followed by the carrots, and then the frozen peas on top. And then on top of that I'm adding the mashed potatoes, and I'm kind of just smoothing it out with the fork. And then to add a little bit of color to the shepherd's pie, I'm going to dust a little bit of paprika over top, and this is super traditional, so I highly recommend doing this step. To cook your shepherd's pie, you want to preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit and then add your pies to the oven near the top rack. You want to make sure to cook it on the top rack so that the mashed potatoes get nice and golden brown. You want to cook your pies for about 30 minutes in the oven and then remove them when you see that they've become nice and golden brown on top, just like this. Let the shepherd's pies cool for at least 10 minutes before bringing it to the table and serving it. As a final garnish, I like to add a little bit of thyme leaves right on top, and then you can go ahead and dig in. These traditional shepherd's pies are great on a cool, crisp fall day and make really good meal prep recipes since you can make them ahead of time, freeze them, and cook them from frozen as you need them. If my last recipe wasn't comforting enough, this recipe for garden tomato soup is guaranteed to warm you up on a cool fall day. This is a great recipe to use up any summer tomatoes that you have left over, and you can actually make a big batch and freeze it for whenever you need it. And with that, let me show you how I make my garden tomato soup. We'll start off by preparing our tomatoes, and here I'm using a variety of tomatoes that are from our garden. So I have red tomatoes, yellow tomatoes, and cherry tomatoes, so you can use whatever color and whatever size tomatoes you have on hand. I'm going ahead and removing the center of each of the tomatoes and then slicing the bigger ones in half. The cherry tomatoes I like to leave just whole on the baking pan because they cook up pretty quick. And then to help balance the acidity of the tomatoes, I like to add a red pepper, and this is a really great alternative to add if you don't want to add sugar to your tomato soup to sweeten it up. So I'm just slicing it up and then I'm going to add it to the baking pan. And for a little bit of extra flavor, I'm going to add some garlic, and I'm just going to leave the garlic cloves in their skins and just toss them onto the baking tray, and they'll cook really quickly in the oven. Once everything is on the baking tray, drizzle all your tomatoes and peppers and garlic with a splash of olive oil, followed by a little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper. And then using clean hands, go ahead and toss all the tomatoes, peppers, and garlic in the olive oil and make sure that every single piece is coated, and this will help it crisp up and cook in the oven. Next, you want to roast your tomatoes at 400 degrees Fahrenheit in your oven for about 25 to 30 minutes. This really depends on the heat of your oven and how fast your tomatoes crisp up. But in the end, you sort of want the skins to peel away and get a little bit charred, just like this. Let the tomatoes cool off for a few minutes before removing the skins. You definitely want to remove the skins since sometimes they can be a little bit bitter and you don't want lumps of skin in your tomato soup. You should be able to remove the skins pretty easily, and same thing with the garlic, it should just pop right out of its papery husk. Add the flesh of the garlic, the tomatoes, and the red peppers into a large stock pot, and don't forget to add the juice that's on the bottom of the pan because this has lots of delicious tomato flavor. To round out the tomatoes a little bit more, I'm going to add some tomato puree followed by a little bit of water, and this will help you really to puree the soup so that it's nice and smooth. To puree the soup, you can use a stick blender like I'm using, or if you have a high-speed blender, you can also use that as well. You want to make sure the soup is super smooth and has no lumps, just like this. Now the ingredient that makes my garden tomato soup really special is adding the rind of Parmesan cheese, and this has so much cheesy flavor and a little bit of saltiness, and it really adds a nice depth to the soup. If you don't have a Parmesan cheese rind, you can also add some grated Parmesan cheese directly into the soup. And finally, I like to add some fresh basil leaves for a lot of brightness and freshness in the soup. Then I'm just going to cover the soup, bring it to a boil, and then let it simmer for about 20 minutes. Once the soup is cooked and all the flavors have come together, add the soup to bowls and bring it to the table. As a little bit of an extra garnish, you may want to add some half and half or some whipped cream to your soup to make it a little bit creamier. It's definitely optional, but in the fall I really like adding it. And of course, you can't have tomato soup without some grilled cheese, so go ahead and make your grilled cheese with your favorite bread and your favorite cheese, and serve alongside your soup. And there you have it, my recipe for garden tomato soup. The cooler days ahead will really make you want a nice warm cup of soup, and this is an excellent one to have on hand. Again, it's a great way to use up any garden tomatoes that you may have on hand, and you can also make it in a big batch and freeze it for whenever you want a nice comforting cup of this garden tomato soup. And of course, don't forget to make a delicious grilled cheese sandwich for dipping. And last but not least, we have a recipe for butternut squash pasta with sage. The pairing of seasonal butternut squash and sage is really traditional in the fall, but sometimes this pairing can get a little bit boring. My recipe ensures that this pasta is really savory and has a nice crunch, so it adds a little bit of a different texture than what you may be used to. So, let me show you how to make it. First, we'll begin by preparing our walnuts, and this is what we're going to use to add a lot of crunch to this pasta recipe. So I'm just adding the walnuts to the cutting board and then chopping them up into fine pieces. If you don't like walnuts, hazelnuts would also work really well here. Once the walnuts are chopped up, just add them to a bowl and set them aside for now. And next we'll chop up our onion, and again you want to make sure you cut it up into really nice fine pieces so that it can blend in with the pasta really well. And next we're going to slice up 2 cloves of garlic, and I like to cut it up into little slices so that it gets nice and golden brown and chewy when it cooks in the pan. And now I'm using a very different pasta than what many of you may be used to, and this pasta is called trofie. You can use whatever type of pasta that you like, but I really like this one in particular because of its shape and how well it holds the sauce. Next we'll go ahead and cook our pasta. Bring a large pot of water to a boil, add a dash of salt, and then add your pasta in. My pasta says it cooks in about 11 to 13 minutes, but I actually undercooked it a little bit so that the pasta is al dente. While the pasta is cooking, we can go ahead and toast our walnuts. So add the chopped walnuts to a pan over medium-high heat. Make sure you don't add any oil to the pan, and then just toast them for about 3 to 4 minutes until they are nice and golden brown and fragrant. Remove the walnuts from the pan and set them aside, and next we're going to toast our sage. And I'm adding some olive oil to the pan here and then adding some whole sage leaves. And you want to make sure you use fresh sage leaves here because they have so much amazing oils and amazing flavor. You want to toast them in the pan again over medium-high heat until the sage leaves become nice and crispy and a little bit curly on the edges. Once you see that, just remove them from the pan and set them aside. Next, add your onions to the pan that we just cooked the sage in, and all of this oil in here is infused with some beautiful sage flavor, so you don't want to throw that away. So again, add your onions and then go ahead and add your garlic once the onions have softened up a bit and become a little bit golden brown. Next you want to add some butternut squash, and this butternut squash I actually roasted ahead of time, and this is a really great trick for meal prepping in the fall. Roasted butternut squash is a great recipe for meal prep because you can make a big batch at the beginning of the week and then just store it in your fridge until you want to add it into a recipe just like this one. Once you added your butternut squash, go ahead and add a couple tablespoons of butter. And again, not the healthiest, but definitely very comforting. I also like to add a little bit of ground black pepper, and then I like to mix everything together and let the butter cook until it's become a nice light brown color. And by now the pasta should be done, so drain it off and then add it directly into the pan. Use a spoon to toss everything to combine, and then let your pasta cook and almost fry up in the sauce for a few minutes until it becomes nice and crispy. And then add a little bit of Parmesan cheese and then mix everything to combine again. And then to serve your pasta, plate it up and then sprinkle a little bit of the toasted walnuts on top, garnish with a few fried sage leaves, and then sprinkle over a little bit more Parmesan cheese on top. And there you have it, my recipe for butternut squash pasta with sage with a little bit of a twist. If you meal prep and roast your butternut squash ahead of time, this recipe comes together in the amount of time it takes to cook your pasta, which is really great and convenient for during the week. So those are my 3 meal prep recipes for fall. These recipes are all incredibly delicious and super comforting. Plus, if you meal prep them ahead of time, you're able to enjoy these delicious recipes on those cold, crisp fall days that just call for comfort food. And thank you for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button, and also please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel by clicking the red subscribe button below. I have lots of other amazing fall videos planned that involves delicious homemade recipes just like these, and also some fun home decor. So hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.